We are in NCCR Core, Module 1, Basic Safety. This is Section 6. This is the last section. So we're learning all about these different safety tips to stay safe on a construction site. And so now we're going to be looking at these job site hazards, things you want to be looking out for and be paying attention to. That's not necessarily related to the work you're actually doing, but just the environment that you're in. You have to pay attention to these things. And so we're going to be looking at chemicals, at some bloodborne pathogens, maybe temperatures. We'll talk about heat exhaustion and those things. And those are the big things we're looking at in job site hazards. So if I can get this to click, the next one, here we go. So examples, lead piping, or just lead in general. So lead was used in piping, batteries, casting metals, and before 1978, before it was outlawed, it was used in lead or in paint. Almost all paint was lead-based before 1978. And so when you're sanding it or the paint chips, it can be very hazardous because you're getting the stuff into your lungs. So always be paying attention when working around old buildings built before 1978. So that's a lot of buildings around here. My house was built in the 50s. So be paying attention to this. Really old houses downtown Lynchburg, probably even more. There's lead-based paint everywhere. And so we just gotta be careful. It's not crazy dangerous that it's going to instantly poison you, but prolonged contact with it, prolonged inhalation of it is going to mess with your lungs and can make you really sick. So especially when working around the paint is when it's so dangerous. It doesn't get airborne with the piping unless you're really cutting it, but when you're working around this paint. So make sure you think it's lead paint, make sure you get the properly trained guy to take care of it for you. They're going to wear a hazmat suit, respirator, and those kind of things. It's not something you do DIY, but probably not really want to do if you want to get it done right. Make sure everyone stays safe. And so if you suspect it, if you're on a job site and you suspect it, tell your boss, make sure he knows about it. You find some bloodborne pathogens. So this is just things from other workers. You could get a disease or sickness just from working around someone and they cut themselves. You get their blood on you. It gets into your bloodstream. You can get bloodborne pathogens. So things like hepatitis B or C or AIDS, which is HIV. These kinds they're transmitted through blood or body fluid. So make sure if you're helping someone, do the proper safety and first aid things. Use gloves, eye protection right. You don't want to contact. You don't want to get those diseases. So pay attention to that. Chemical hazards. So there's a lot of strong chemicals on job sites. There's some acids that are used for dyeing concrete or etching concrete. There's a lot of flammable vapors that could happen. Sometimes you're working with propane or different things. Those can be flammable. Different paints are super strong, or epoxies and glues. They can really get you high on different stuff. So you got to be careful. It's like sniffing a Sharpie, right? You sniff it long enough, you're going to get high. So imagine that bigger scale on some of these job sites. So make sure you're paying attention, and if you're working around chemical hazards, doing the proper safe things to keep yourself safe. So different signage that you would see. So flammable is this, oxidizer is here, and exploding. If it's explosive, it's going to look like it's exploding. So things to pay attention to when working around things. Sometimes you don't even always think about stuff. So when you're using a rag to stain something, stain can spontaneously combust. The problem is people just throw an old stain rag, to throw it in the trash can, and then as that stain is curing, as it's starting to dry, it creates heat. And if it's around paper and other things in that trash can, the heat it creates, it can burst into flame because it hits that other stuff in the trash can. You hit that flammable point early, and all of a sudden it bursts into flames. Now your trash can's on fire, you burn down your shop. So you got to make sure you're paying attention to these flammable things and disposing of them correctly. In case of those rags, either just let them out to dry and exposed, don't leave them all balled up, but just flat out to dry, or just throw them in a thing of water, and just don't let them ever dry out. So there's different ways, but pay attention when working around flammable stuff. So here are some more different site hazards, signs to pay attention to. This is a health hazard to you. Exclamation point means just this could cause issues. Pay attention. Here you have gas under pressure. Skin, it can burn you. Kills fish. Don't put this in the water. skull and crossbones, it'll kill you instantly, basically, is what that means. So don't drink it, don't expose yourself to it. Radiation signs, make sure you pay attention to these. Be extremely careful. You're only working around this if you're a trained professional. So don't mess around, don't wander into somewhere where you're not supposed to be. Make sure you're trained. So this is a huge one. So some site hazards that we don't always pay attention to, especially working here in the South where it gets super humid, right? You can get heat stress, heat cramps, heat exhaustion, or heat stroke. It's basically a cycle that leads to the next. So heat stress, we all go through heat stress. That's getting hot and getting sweaty. That's pretty normal, right? That just means your body is getting overheated, which is just from being outside in the sun. Problem is when you don't pay attention. So heat cramp then is when you're getting dehydrated. Your muscles are building up the lactic acid and they're starting to cramp. Your stomach's starting to cramp up. That's heat cramp. So then the next level, if you still aren't paying attention, you're still just keep working. I mean, this happens on football practice and stuff too. This can move into heat exhaustion. All right. And so heat exhaustion, you notice it, your skin gets, it starts to get cool and pale and moist, right? So when the heat exhaustion is setting, all of a sudden you start to get the chills. It's hot outside, but your body feels cold, right? Really heavy sweating. This is when you get nausea, you start puking your guts out, some dizziness, you feel like you might faint. So these are the things or signs of heat exhaustion, right? It's that cool skin, that damp, all of a sudden your body's reacting. It doesn't know what to do with the heat. And this is kind of your last warning before it gets real serious. You need to take a break. You need to get some liquid in you. Drink some Gatorade, drink some water, because heat stroke is just around the corner. And so when you feel that heat exhaustion setting in, don't just keep working through it. Take a break, get cooled off, drink some water. Because heat stroke can be fatal, right? It can kill you. And so the symptoms of heat stroke are your skin now is hot and dry. And sometimes your skin will get blotchy or kind of spotted looking. But you stop sweating. You're at the point where your body doesn't have any more liquid in you to sweat. So now all of a sudden your skin gets super hot and is drying out. So extremely high body temperature. Remember, heat exhaustion, you're cool. Now heat stroke, you're overheating. You're boiling basically inside. And so it's like you have a fever. Your body temperature goes way up. Your pupils get really small. They don't dilate. They're actually getting smaller. Mental confusion. You get headaches, vision impairment, you can't see right. You might start to seize, like start convulsing, and you might just pass out. And so again, these are all dangerous things. Pass out, stop breathing, heart stop, because you overheated. Your body has said it's had too much and is ready to shut down. And so be paying attention. Now, it's not just working out in the heat that can get you messed up, but also when you're working in the cold. So frostbite is when your tissues are dead. It's like freezer burn on an old piece of meat that you find in the freezer. One of those old burger patties with freezer bite or freezer burn. That's what frostbite is to your fingers, right? Basically, the skin cells die. It happens to your fingers, toes, and nose. And if it gets really bad, it won't come back. The blood flow basically stops and it's not coming back. So you want to move yourself to a warm area and start applying warm water, not super hot. You don't want to do this really fast because that'll shock the skin, shock your muscles, and kill it. And then that's when people's fingers and stuff fall off. We're working really cold. So make sure you do it slowly. Move back to a heat surface or a heated room. Hypothermia is heat stroke because your body overheats. Hypothermia is your body freezes and it can't handle the temperatures anymore. And so a big thing is drowsiness and confusion, but you start to just feel like all you can do, you just have to sleep because your body's shutting itself down, trying to keep itself alive. Problem is, if you're out in the middle of the woods and you're that cold, you fall asleep, lots of times you just don't wake up because your body never recovers because it's still out in the cold. So if you start feeling this, gotta make sure you get inside, replace any wet clothing, get warm. And so drink warm drinks, avoid caffeine and alcohol. Because it's just it's more things for your body to process. So you just want warm tea, warm water, warm milk, something that's going to slowly bring your body temperature back up. Again, you don't want to shock the body. You don't want to throw them in a hot tub. You want to do this slowly. So to avoid it, you just dress in layers. Make sure you're prepared for the day. Look at the weather before you go to work outside. Make sure your stuff is waterproof. because really the thing that gets you cold is just when you get wet. So keep yourself dry, and then carry extra clothing. Have that extra jacket, have that extra hat or something in case you do get wet, you can keep yourself dry. Welding hazard. So I don't know if all of you guys know this, but if you watch someone weld, the sparks here can blind you. It's basically like looking at the surface of the sun. And so that's why welders always have this hood on. And they're basically, remember when we had that solar eclipse and those super strong safety glasses you had to wear to look at the sun to watch the eclipse? That's what welders have. And so it's protecting their eyes so they can see this molten metal, this arcing electricity without losing their eyesight, because it'll actually burn your retinas on the back. And it creates basically a sandy feeling in your eyes. And so, you can't fix it. Once your eyes are burnt, they're burnt. And so you always want to protect your vision. You only get 2 eyes. You never get new ones. So protect them. And so that's what you're doing here. Also notice he has special gloves on and different things. And here he has a hood that is taking out the bad fumes being created. So make sure you're just doing welding safely. Make sure you have all the safeguards up. At a minimum, make sure you have this, and you're really going to want gloves because it really burns. So all the different fuels, make sure those are stored safely. Flammable cabinets, keep distance away from the gases that can explode and all those sort of things. Cage, lots of times they keep the cylinders in these cages, so make sure no one messes with them. And then if you're working around other people, you want to put up a welding shield or welding curtains to protect other people. You're going to wear those things for yourself, but then you want to put up the welding curtains to protect those around you. And so fire doesn't just happen. Fire needs 3 things. You remove one of the 3 from this triangle and it won't burn. You need something that's going to burn, the fuel, so that's the wood. You need a heat source, right? You light a match or a lighter, you need something to get it started, and then you need oxygen. So a way to put out a fire is you cut out the air, right? So if a pan catches on fire, you put the lid on it, it kills the fire because there's no air getting to it. So it needs oxygen. You need these 3 things or nothing will burn. And so fire extinguishers are made to prevent these things from happening. You're removing one of these things. So some of them just have water in them, pressurized water, and you are dousing the fuel so that it no longer is a burnable fuel. Or sometimes it's a chemical, you're putting a foam over it because you're getting rid of its oxygen source, right? And so that's how you prevent a fire. That's what fire needs. And so always work in a ventilated area. See these things, make sure you're checking the fire extinguishers in your shops regularly, make sure they're up to date. You should know how to do them. You pull the pin, aim and spray, basically. And so there's different types. Class C, you're going to use for electrical equipment. Class B is for liquids, so oils and gases and things. And then A is for wood or paper. So this is basically water. This one is probably a powder because think what happens if you put water onto oil, it makes the fire bigger. So you want to make sure you're using the right kind. This one is a combination one. You can use it for everything, but just make sure you're using the right type of fire extinguisher because you can make a really big mess if you choose the wrong kind. If you choose a water fire extinguisher and you start spraying it on that gas, that liquid, it's going to make the fire worse. So make sure you're using the right stuff. So remember, Class C is for your electrical equipment. Metals is D. Rare, that's a specialty thing where they're going to be using those. But so C is electrical, B is flame or liquids, and ordinary. So here we have, do not use a CO2 extinguisher on a Class D fire as it can cause the fire to spread. Again, pay attention, use the right one for the right thing. You don't want to make it worse. But again, pull, aim, squeeze, that easy. Confined spaces. And so when you're working in confined spaces, notice he has a respirator on because, and here's an air supply bringing in fresh air because if you're working in little spaces, you run out of oxygen, you need oxygen to live. You want to make sure that you're paying attention and not putting yourself at risk. There's all kinds of different confined spaces, but if you have to work in one, you need a written authorization known as an entry permit. So you can't work into it unless you have that entry permit. So just make sure you got that because you want to make sure you're safe. Old farm silos, the stuff where they store the grain, those big towers you see on farms, that's a pretty common place that you don't think about, and farmers have died because they're just in there shoveling the grain, and all of a sudden the fumes are so bad they can't breathe and they die. And so just keep yourself safe, be trained, don't just walk into things without knowing what you're doing, pay attention. So that's wrapping up the different hazards.